Questions of Doom.
Hello and welcome back to another Questions of Doom. In this series, as ever, I attempt to answer questions that you send my way using the archeosoup@gmail.com email address, as displayed on the YouTube channel homepage, but also, as you'll see, at the end of this video. In answering these questions by video, it is my fond hope that the answer is not only useful to the person who asks the question, but also anyone else out there who may be wondering the same thing. Now, today's question comes from YouTube user FidGaff, and it goes like this. Hello, Mr. Soup. Welcome back from your holidays. I hope Mrs. Soup is well. She is, thank you very much for asking. I noticed that you use the BCAD descriptions in your year descriptors, and not the BCE-CE, i.e. before Common Era and Common Era descriptors. As Wiki says, the BCE-CE notation has been adopted by numerous authors and publishers wishing to be neutral or sensitive to non-Christians. I would be curious if you could discuss its origin and use, if any, among modern scientific papers relating to archaeology, and why you choose to use the BCAD, and your reasons for apparently rejecting BCE-CE. Thanks, FidGaff. Well, FidGaff, you ask a fine question. Actually, this is a question that goes to the heart of many discussions actually happening around the world, actually, in homes, schools, public institutions, governments, and of course here on YouTube, with regards to how it is that we choose to refer to the year, or the years in which we're living, I suppose, the era in which we live in previous eras. Now, the origins of BCAD obviously lie in a Christian context, and they actually lie with the 6th century monk Dionysius Exiguus, who decided that he wanted to introduce a new way of referring to a certain period of time which had become known as an era of martyrs, the Anno Diocletiani, the years of Diocletian and the martyrs that he killed. Now these were known quite conveniently as AD, Anno Diocletiani, and therefore he decided to switch this focus from a man who, no matter how you look at it, someone who kills people because of what they believe is a bit of a tyrant, decided to switch the focus on that period of time to Anno Domini, the year of our Lord. Now, this clearly had an impact on many dating systems since, and has gone on to affect how huge swathes of the world refer to time. And it all revolves around a period of time around about 2,000 years ago, which is when, according to this dating system, Christ was born. Now, conveniently, as I say, both years' systems, the Anno Diocletiani and the Anno Domini, both had AD, and therefore one was easily sort of replaced by the other. But actually, before him, most Romans, indeed most Roman Christians, used entirely different ways of referring to periods of time. Chunks of time were actually broken up into consulships. So the years of the consuls of so-and-so and so-and-so, X and Y, were in consulship for this chunk of years. And then another chunk of years when another pair of people came into political office, so on and so forth. Or later on when one person filled that role here and there. So, so actually that was a more commonly used way of referring to miniature eras, I suppose, or alternatively actually in the Roman world, in historical documents, the years since the founding of Rome itself. So, yeah, it wasn't universally adopted all that quickly, and before it, actually, there were other ways of doing this in the Roman and the Christian world. But he is the man who started off, Dionysius Exiguus. Now, the reference, you make reference to the term Common Era and before Common Era. And what's interesting actually is that the word Common Era, the words Common Era, actually do have their roots in a Christian context. They don't refer to a non-Christian period of time, or rather a non-Christian reckoning of time, rather a non-royal reckoning of time. Around about 1615, the so-called Vulgar Era, which comes from the Latin for common, was thought of as a way of referring to a commonly reckoned period of time, that is increasingly common throughout Europe, which did not rely upon the reigns of a certain monarch. So as opposed to saying, you know, the 13th year of Henry VIII's reign, that kind of thing, you would instead make reference to 15 1526 or whatever, something like that. Now, obviously, that's not entirely accurate. Don't look that up and criticise me. But nonetheless, the point is, you wouldn't be referring to when a king or queen was in office. Rather, you're referring to years since, essentially, again, the birth of Christ or the conception. And this was a dating system which was being used increasingly by a common group of people, that is, people in other countries as well. So the Common Era actually is referring to the Christian era, as opposed to regal reigns, or sort of rather the reigns of kings and queens. Common Era became increasingly neutral, well, not neutral, sorry, rather alternative as time went on. By the mid 18th and 19th, well, sorry, by the mid 19th century, rather, sorry, but from the 1800s, I suppose, onwards, you had an increasing tendency for example, Jewish scholars to make use of the term Common Era as a way of having an alternative way of referring to the past that didn't invoke AD and BC. Now, why is this a problem? Why would they have a problem with that? Well, because the terms AD and BC imply two things. First of all, BC, before the Christ. It implies that the historical figure of Jesus, if and when he existed, was in fact the Christ. And this has big implications, particularly if you are of Jewish extraction, and especially if you're a Jewish scholar. And AD, the year of our Lord, well, that implies lordship. And if you don't particularly want to be acknowledging that the Christ was the Christ, as it were, you don't want to be acknowledging that he may well be your Lord as well. So that's certainly a reason not to go with AD and BC. Also, actually, another reason is that the date isn't all that certain. If we're talking about calendars, and calendars are best when they're accurate, it seems that scholars can't quite agree when this figure may well have been born. So it could have been a couple of years before or after. So in some ways, AD and BC isn't actually the most accurate way of doing it anyway. Now, there are some arguments for the use of AD and BC. The first one obviously being a Christian argument, in particular in the Bible Belt in America. There are many folk who argue that, well, of course we use AD and BC. It reflects the importance of Christ and his impact on history. And of course there are many people who would say there are other important figures as well, so that's not the best argument. If we took out AD and BC, we might as well get rid of the numbering as well, in so much as a rose by any other name. If we call it, I don't know, Iggle and Boggle, we're still referring to a point in time which is essentially of a Christian reckoning or important to Christians. The French Revolution did in fact try this. They attempted to rework the calendar to start from the beginning of the Revolution and introduced a 10-day week, which did not invoke creation, as it were, but that didn't stick. The same goes for communist countries. Pre- and post-communism calendrical reckoning didn't really stick, unfortunately. Now, another facetious argument is that we should also, therefore, if we're going to chuck out AD and BC, we should chuck out the days of the week, because after all, I don't believe in Thor on a Thursday. Why on earth should I do that? Why should I call Thursday Thor's Day? We should possibly throw out the months of the year. January, Janus or Janus, the two-faced Roman god. I don't believe in Janus. Why should I call January January? Other things, the names of planets. Jupiter, the head of the Roman gods. Why on earth is Jupiter called Jupiter? Or indeed my name. My name is Mark, spelled with a C. Mark comes from Mars, the Roman god Mars. I don't believe in Mars necessarily. Why should I call myself Mark? This is just ridiculous. So I suppose the more you look at it, actually, the more the argument for, well, I don't subscribe to that, I don't have to believe that, it kind of falls apart. We subscribe to many things when we don't believe them. As I say, I don't necessarily believe in Mars, but I'm called Mark. Have to live with it. It's just, one of those things. Plus, I quite like the name Mark, anyway. Now, we could potentially adopt, it has been suggested by some, a Quaker system. That is, a system that doesn't refer to any famous people or religious figures. But again, there's an irony inherent in that, and that is we're adopting another ideology. You are imposing the ideology of no historical figures on the world, and therefore, actually, it's just as bad as imposing any other ideology, if you see what I mean. So you get into very sticky water once you try to really nail this down. Now, one of the reasons why actually personally I use AD and BC is because AD and BC are easy to differentiate. I have a bit of a problem in terms of dyslexia. In fact, I'm quite impressively dyslexic. This meant I had to work harder in school, but it also meant, or means rather, that I find CE and BCE very hard visually to differentiate when I'm looking at dates and things, especially in textbooks and things. So AD and BC for me is simply easier to separate. I can tell AD, BC. I don't even think, for example, when I'm thinking of Skara Brae, that's certainly a BC site. I don't think about Christ when I'm thinking about that site. I simply think, well, that's roughly, that period of time, and it's before this point in time. So for me, it doesn't really invoke a belief, as it were. Rather, it's simply a convenient way of separating out two chunks of time, two common eras, as it were, I suppose. Now, archaeologists do deal with many different calendars, and they deal with AD and BC all the time. Usually, these will be published, for example, if you're talking about, say, a Mayan site, you'll talk about, if you want to, you can mention a Mayan calendrical date, you can mention a common date, as it were, as reckoned by our calendar, and you can also mention before present, that is 1950, as reckoned by carbon dating, if you really want to. So archaeologists have to reconcile these things all the time, but usually they do it by making reference to more than one dating system, if they really want to be precise. There are those out there who will insist, or try to insist, that their students, for example, in essays, use one or t'other in terms of reference to the past, common era, before common era. But again, I think we come back to that irony where you're imposing an ideology. Isn't that just as bad as imposing a supposed Christian ideology on folk? Well, there's also actually a bit of a misconstrusion when it comes to the neutrality of Common Era and before Common Era. There are many folk, for example, read about a couple of Hindu scholars, for example, who are actually, they go, well, actually no, this isn't neutral. You're still pointing to that point in time. You might as well call it BCAD. Before Common Era does not reckon, for example, or this particular gentleman's calendrical history or cultural history. So in some ways, we're kidding ourselves when we say, oh no, we're making it neutral. We're not. We're still referring to something. And I suppose that's really where I would draw the line. I would say we need to relax about this, folks. People have always referred to things by referring to important things. As I say, star systems, planets, names, days of the week, months of the year. And in this sense, even though those meanings and associations change, the actual word sometimes, more often than not, does continue. And we perhaps just have to accept that that's the case. Either that, or try and invent a whole new calendar, but as soon as you do that, again, you kind of got the same problem. You're imposing a belief system onto people, or rather, a non-belief system onto people. Personally, I don't necessarily think that AD/BC actually invokes anything. When I write down a date, I am simply, or when I refer to a date, I'm simply referring to that point in time. I am not trying to advocate a belief in a particular religion, and I'm certainly not thinking about that particular religion when I'm thinking about these particular dates, places, peoples and times. So I'm going to throw this open to discussion out there. I've tried to be as concise as possible. This is quite a big topic to talk about. Please do comment below what your opinions are. Of course, I believe that there is a cultural relativism, and we must try and keep our own values out of archaeological study, absolutely. But at the same time as well, I think we have to accept that, as I say, some things will always be referred to. You always have to have a data point, as it were, on a grid. And the same goes for days, months, weeks, people, places, planets, etc., etc. So why not for an eon of time? It just is the way it is, I'm afraid. Anyway, comment below, try and keep them clean, don't shout at each other, and enjoy. Until next time, bye-bye.